Well, welcome back, folks. This is video number five, I think it is, in the Davinci Resolve User Reference Manual step-by-step series. Today we're going to be dealing with project settings. Yeah, I know, but if we get this stuff taken care of, it sure does help us out later. I know I've said that before, but you know, these first 4 or 5 videos are all about setting up your preferences, your settings, getting things done so that you have as few problems later on as possible, and also to kind of learn about some of the settings so you know what to go and change later when we do have some problems. You know, sometimes Davinci Resolve is known for being a little slow on playback or even crashing. Depending on what your system is, you know, you might have to go tweak a few things, and hopefully in the previous videos you've kind of learned a little bit about what you might want to look at if something like that happens. And then this one we're going to show you quite a few project settings that you might want to set a certain way, and then you'll know what to look at later. Now make sure you check out the links in the description. You'll find one for the user manual PDF. You definitely want to download that so you can kind of follow along. And also you'll see a link to the site where you can download the free version of Davinci Resolve. So you can get that going if you haven't done that already. And also I've included some links to some helpful training sites by Blackmagic. Also some other YouTube uploaders who I'm not affiliated with. I don't know them and they don't know me, but their videos really helped me out when I was starting. So you might want to take a look at some of those. A lot of those are a lot more specific and a lot faster paced about specifically doing things. And maybe check those out and then come on back here and get back with the step-by-step user manual series. So let's go ahead and boot up Davinci Resolve and get started. Right here I'm in the project manager, what I get to when I first open Davinci, if I have not set it to open my previous project, which I usually keep that set. I think I mentioned that in the previous videos, but for the sake of this video I wanted to start here at the project manager and start a new project. Now this actually isn't a new project, it's just named new project. I actually opened it once already, so it would be here, but you can just click on untitled project or new project and it's pretty much the same thing. I probably ought to start trying to look at the camera instead of looking off to the side at the lens. You'd probably get a little better. Probably look a little less weird with me talking like this all the time. Hey, thank you for watching my video. So anyway, I'll try to look at the camera. So anyway, I'm going to open my new project. Double click that. And here we are in an empty new project. Now we're going to want to take care of some of these settings before we import any media. Don't import anything yet because it kind of messes a couple things up. So you can either get to your project settings down here on the bottom right, this gear here, or you can go up to, File, Project Settings, or the shortcut as you see right here is Shift 9. I tend to just go down here to the gear if I'm already in a project. Now presets is the first thing on this list, but we're going to skip that because we're going to want to change some things and then set a preset. There's no reason to go ahead and set a preset right at this exact moment because we haven't done anything, and then we'd have to save that again anyway. So we may as well just save some things and then we'll go set a preset. So first thing we see is master settings, timeline resolution. This is where you choose the resolution of your timeline. Not necessarily what you're going to export as, but most of the time, whatever you plan on making your video at the end, what you want to export it as, you're going to set it as this. You start getting a little more advanced with things, you might find some reasons that you want to set this differently. But for now, what do you want to export your video as? Set that here. Now what this is, this for blank times blank processing, this is just for resolutions that you won't find in this list. So if you kind of wanted to make your own resolution, or if you wanted something that was 1280 by 960, I don't see that here. So if you were going to make that for some reason, you could do that here. Pixel aspect ratio, pretty much going to leave this at square. You'll notice a couple of them on my screen are grayed out. I'm pretty sure that's because I don't have the paid studio version. There's also CinemaScope. If you get familiar with doing that later on, you might want to come back and change that. I personally never found a necessity yet to take it off of square. Now your timeline frame rate, this is one of those things that I said we would mess up if we imported some media before we change these settings, because once you import a piece of media, this frame rate will gray out. You won't be able to change it. So you want to set this first. Now, I'm going to set it at 30, and your playback frame rate is what you, let's see if I can move this. This is your viewing area, where when your playhead is over a clip and you're editing it, you will see it playing back here. Now, depending on how your system runs, it might not play back perfectly well at the same frame rate that you have your timeline. So you might need to lower it. If, like, let's say you're doing a 60 frames per second timeline and you don't have a real hefty system, and playing back at 60 frames here in the viewer makes it kind of stutter and jitter. So you might want to lower it back down to 30. I pretty much work with 30 frames per second, and I keep my playback frame rate at 30, and it works fine with what I have. But it's one of those things you might want to jot down, that if you start seeing jerkiness in your viewing area, that you might want to come lower this. Now, for video monitoring, let's take a look at the manual for this, because I've had a couple debates with people about this. If you read right here, the first paragraph, the settings available in this group control the signal that's output by the video output interface that's connected to your workstation. That is an external additional device. If you are just running DaVinci Resolve through your laptop or PC with your monitor that's connected to your PC, then nothing in this panel will affect anything you're doing. And there will be people who will probably comment that I'm wrong, and hey, maybe I am, but I have emailed Blackmagic and I have talked to some professionals via text. I don't actually know any DaVinci professionals personally, and they all agree with me that this video monitoring is all for external video output interfaces. So let's go back to the panel. That doesn't mean we don't want to know a little bit about it. So to make yourself feel better, just set this at the same thing this is set at. So I've got 1920 by 1080 HD, that's 1080p. Bam, 30 frames per second, 1080p 30. That's what I keep it on. It pretty much stays there. This use 444 SDI, use level A for 3 GB SDI. That is all you can read here. A signal path for monitoring image data to monitors that supports 4x4x4 chroma sampling, typically over SDI connections. You know, a lot of people do that. They work on their main screens right in front of their computer to do their editing and stuff, but they have a much more expensive, much more high definition grading monitor that's usually connected via like a deck link that Blackmagic sells. Here I am not looking at the camera again. Hi! Connected to a deck link that Blackmagic sells, and they get a much more clean grading experience, as well as being able to capture video directly from their camera to their computer. And so a lot of people do that. If you're a beginner, you're probably not doing that unless you just inherited some really badass system from somebody. So we're really going to skip all this. It doesn't really pertain to too many people below the really advanced intermediate area. And once you get there, just come read through this. It's not very much. It's a few paragraphs. It'll let you know what that stuff is for. There's no reason for us to just bog ourselves down with it. So let's scroll down and get to optimize media and render cache. Now this stuff's kind of important. I know I've said it before. DaVinci is known for crashing. It's also known for having stuttering playback with imported media. It has a little bit of a hard time with dealing with the media in the container that it comes in, the MOV files or the MP4 files. Sometimes, and it really depends on, another thing depends on your system. If you've got a really badass system, you might never notice this, you might never have to do this. It really depends on what kind of camera you're using and things like that. But in the media pool, you'll be able to right-click your media and choose optimize. And this determines what format it gets optimized in. Now, right in here, you're gonna see codecs. And we could do an entire video series on codecs, what they are, what they're for, when you should use which ones. In fact, universities do multi-semester courses about digital video codecs. So I'm not a master at them. I don't know a whole lot about them. I know which ones pretty much I should use. And I'm going to put a couple links in the description to 2 YouTube uploaders and their videos. It's 2 if my fingers didn't get up there. And the videos that they uploaded that really helped me out. They're pretty short, but between the 2 of them, they'll give you an extreme amount of quick information to let you know just what you need to know, just enough to where you can make a good educated decision on what formats you should choose here. One of them is by Gerald Undone, and the other one's by a company. I can't actually remember. I think it's B&H Photo actually that might have put it up. But anyway, look at those in the description before you make decisions on what to choose here, unless you already know what to do. Those are good videos. So anyway, I keep it on DN by HR HQ for my optimized media format and my render cache format. Now rendering cache is a little different from optimized media. When you optimize your media, Davinci takes the whole media file and then transcodes it into this codec, which makes it easier for Davinci to deal with. It also becomes a really large file that's stored on your computer. But anyway, render cache, while you're working in your timeline, when you make changes to a clip, when you either cut it, or if you're dealing with a fusion clip and you make some changes, it has to re-render it so that it'll play back smoothly, and it will cache them if you tell it to. Now, typically, let's see if I can I get out of here and go back to playback, and render cache is on none. Now, that's because this machine is not the machine that I actually edit on. It's just the one I usually shoot my videos on. But typically, I leave mine on user. And then we will now go back to the settings to show why. I have clicked enable background caching after 5 seconds. I actually tend to make that 3. And then automatically cache transitions in user mode. Yes, when I add a transition between clips, I want it to immediately cache it so that I don't have to deal with my computer trying to render that every time I play through. And really, your transitions don't change much. Once you place one, you very rarely are going to change that transition. So you just cache it once and it'll play back smooth every time. Automatically cache composites in user mode. Yes, I like it to do that. Automatically cache fusion effects in user mode. Yes, I definitely like it to do that because fusion effects are very processor intensive. So I like those things to get cached while I'm not playing through them, you know, while I'm working on other parts of the timeline. And then when I actually am trying to play back and I get to that part, it just plays right through it. Maybe not all the time, but for the most part. Now, your working folders here, this is your cache files location and your gallery stills location. This is a place where it puts the temporary cached clips. Another, once again, as I've mentioned in previous videos, this is a moment where you want to choose the correct hard drive to place these clips. If you're using a smaller boot drive like an SSD, a 256 or 128 gigabyte SSD that you do not want filled up with data lore, then you are going to want to go here and browse and make sure that this is set to the correct one. Now, this system only has one hard drive, so my C drive, Steve videos, cache clip is fine, but just something to keep in mind. Next, we have frame interpolation, and let's jump into the manual for this. These settings determine the default state for all retiming speed change effects, including when clips are in mixed frame rate timelines. Okay, and under the retime process, basically if you look down here under nearest, frame blend, and optical flow, the 3 options that you have, you'll see the most processor efficient, also processor efficient but smoother results, most processor intensive but highest quality. So what's that sound like? Good, better, and best. Basically just going to pick the one that your system can handle. I keep it on frame blend, but you know, if you want to just try something out, put it on optical flow. Motion estimation mode is again good, better, best, and bestierest. put it on enhance better, and then this motion range, I'm not really sure what this is, and the manual does not explain it real well. If you want to take a gander at the manual, motion range right here. When using mixed frame rate clips in a timeline that is optical flow retime selected, or when using optical flow to process speed change effects, this pop-up menu lets you choose the default setting to use small, medium, or large motion. Don't really know which one's better. For all speed and motion related calculations, so you can try and improve the result by matching the type of motion in the source media. This setting can also be changed on a clip-by-clip basis in the Edit Page Inspector, and I don't know, maybe they mean you need to choose just how much motion is going on in that scene. I'm not real sure. I don't mess with it because I don't keep it on optical flow. I keep it on the middle one, frame blend, and so far that's pretty much worked for what I needed to do. And now that we've made a couple changes, let's go to the preset section and save this as a preset. Up at the top, we'll select presets, and we will save as, name it whatever you want. This will be my YouTube configuration. And now if we were to make any changes, let's go to, let's just change something real quick and go back to presets, and you'll see it's highlighted. I can click save now, and it will basically refresh my preset with the new changes I made. So that's how you'll refresh it later after we make more changes to this that you might want to save. Okay, let's go down to image scaling. First thing we see is the resize filter. If we look over at the manual, we will see that these settings affect the methods used to resize clips in various situations. So if you are going to scale up or down your images based on what your timeline is and what the image's native resolution is, then this is what affects it. And basically this is another set of those good, better, best, and bestest settings. I keep mine on sharper, usually provides the best quality in projects using clips that must be scaled up to fill a larger frame size or scaled down to HD resolutions. This is also another one of those settings to keep in mind later on as you continue to use the software. If you start to see, performance problems in your playback viewer, come play around with this and see if this is causing an issue, especially if you know for a fact that you have some footage that you've had to scale up or down to fit inside the resolution of your timeline and you're having playback issues. You might want to come and either well, I'm sure you'd want to lower this from whatever you had and see if that affected it. But for now, I keep it on sharper. It doesn't seem to be giving me too much of a problem. Override input scaling. Checking this box lets you choose an input sizing preset to apply to a project. And you'll notice on my software, if I was to check that and then open the pull down, I have none. There's nothing that I can choose. So that's because I'm sure that I've never saved anything as an input scaling preset. Kind of one of these advanced features that I don't think you're going to need, and I haven't seen a whole lot online about people that use this. And that's something to keep in mind about this manual and this software in general. This is kind of a professional level software. People in all levels of filmmaking use this. So it has a lot of functions and a lot of features that that are for people that are doing, broadcast level, theater level productions. And most of us, I know most of us are just one-man show. We're trying to make some videos, put them up on YouTube, put them on Facebook, maybe get a little side gig going, making wedding videos for people. It's not something, that we're doing to a level to where we have to have input scaling presets. If you want to, this is one of those things, if you want to look it up, do a little investigation about what it is, be my guest. I did, and I don't see a need for it. So I would just leave these off. Now we get to anti-alias edges. Best thing to do is keep this on auto until you really start getting a little more advanced and specifically when you do not, and when you do want it to do that, just leave it on auto. Deinterlace quality. If you look at the manual, it says only available in the studio version. Well, I have it, and I don't have the studio version. So I noticed some things are supposed to be available in the free version, and they're grayed out on my software. So, I don't know if the manual writers just kind of put that in the wrong place, but I don't know. I can't tell you. Anyway, it mentions a fourth group of settings let you choose the quality processing time trade-off when deinterlacing media pool clips using the Enable Deinterlacing checkbox in the Clip Attributes window. There are two settings, normal and high. The default is normal. That's where I leave it. I don't deal with interlaced footage very much, if at all. And we could do a whole video on what the difference between that is, but basically if your camera device records in a resolution that ends with an I, like 1080i, that is interlaced media. If it ends in a P, that is it progressive? Progressive media. So if you record in 1080p, you don't even need to worry about this. If you do record in interlaced media, then there's several settings that you might want to look up. I would probably search on YouTube for Davinci Resolve interlaced media, and probably some uploaders that do use that will be able to give you a little more insight. The devices I use recorded progressive media, so I've never had to really deal with interlaced media. Input scaling. This is kind of an important one. Here we have some options. The default is scale entire image to fit. As you can see here, this image that I have in there, by scaling image to fit, it takes the longest side and it makes it fit the viewer. And if that is the side, as it is with mine, then you will see blanking here on the left and right to fill in the space. If the longest side happened to have been the top and bottom, if this image was shaped like this, then you would basically see it just like that, like right here, and you would see black lines on the top and bottom. That is the setting by default, and what I pretty much recommend you keep it as. If you were to change it, you may not get to see your entire image, and therefore you might not know exactly how you want to scale it or zoom it, whatever. If you put center crop with no resizing, let's say save, and see, that is the actual size of this image compared to the size of my timeline. So you can see that it's much smaller, which is okay, but if let's say it had been a lot bigger, it might look like that, and you'd be like, oh, whoa, what is that? And it would still say 0 here, or 1, I think is the default. Yeah, 1. It would still say 0 there, but then you'd have to go move it back to try to see, okay, let's see what it looks. It looks like that, so where do I want to zoom it? And you may or may not be able to see your whole image if you have that selected. If we choose scale full frame with crop, what that does is it takes the shortest side, which you can see is left to right. So basically this is exactly how wide it is, but now because it zoomed it to that extent, we can't see how tall it is. We have to zoom up and down just to find it again. Now if we jump over to stretch frame to all corners, of course you can probably guess what that's going to do. Let me change the zoom back to 1. It's going to make sure that it fits the entire image in the view screen, no matter what it has to do to the image to make that happen, in which case you can see that it's stretched. And I think, how does the manual put it? It says that it will be squished or stretched to match the frame size in all dimensions. Kind of like the way they put that. So anyway, my best advice to you, keep it on scale entire image to fit, and then you will always see the entire image with whatever dimension is the longest, and you can decide how you want to zoom it for that shot, from there, but at least you can see the whole image. Output scaling, if we jump to the manual, it says here, these settings let you optionally choose a different resolution to be output via your media output interface for monitoring, outputting to tape, or rendering. So this does affect something other than just external interfaces. says down at the bottom, this can be used in situations where you're working on a high resolution 4K project, but you want to monitor using an HD display and you want to output HD resolution for media approval, like for client approval. There's no reason to make a perfect 4K render when you're just trying to get them to agree with, whether you included all the correct footage or, make them happy. And then it says match timeline settings is turned on by default so that these settings mirror the timeline resolution, image scaling, and input image scaling settings described above that we've already dealt with. Just leave this turned on. Therefore, it grays out all of these options that you're really not going to use right now. You can come take a look at this stuff months down the road, when you decide you want to really start playing around with the guts of the software. I haven't found a need for this yet. I'm sure some people would have a comment on a good use for it. Please do. Mismatched resolution files lets you choose an alternative way of handling mismatched resolution files given the alternate resolution you've chosen. These options work identically to those in the input image scaling group. So it mentions that this works exactly the way this works. That's why I'm not exactly sure what the difference is. I just leave them saying the same thing. And then we have super scale, which is actually grayed out on mine, and thankfully, because it doesn't mention it in the manual. So, it doesn't let me use it anyway, so I guess it really doesn't matter. Now we jump to color management, where there's a setting under the color science that I do change, but sometimes I come and change it back just to see if it makes my footage look better, because it does actually help sometimes, and sometimes it hurts. But the ACES color science was developed by the Filmmakers Academy, the same academy that does the Academy Awards. And to try to standardize color grading, I guess, throughout the industry, they came up with this ACES format that I've been reading a lot and heard a lot of professionals talk about. This is pretty much here to stay, and it's probably going to become the standard in filmmaking. Looking over here, so we'll see a little example here. You see this image I have? Do you see these little highlights, these little lights, the red, the yellow, and the green? Well, if we change back to the default and hit save, you'll see that goes away. But, which seems like, oh no, well, I want to keep it on ACES. I want as much detail as possible. But then again, this is kind of an old, vintage looking picture. It's supposed to look kind of old and not really all that high tech. So if you really look at it for a minute and stare at it, and then we go and change that back to ACES again, you'll see it almost looks a little out of place when it comes back, like a little pixelated, like a, it depends on the eye of the beholder. It can make things look better, or it can make things look worse. Here's another image that we'll look at. Well, first of all, let me turn it off. Let me put it back to YRGB. And we will look at this image here. Okay? This is a NASA shot. So, it's very high up in the air. This is a very big extended square mile area. So this is with the YRGB color space. If we change it to ACES, it almost seems to become a little pixelated to me. See how it added a lot more detail into like the forest regions here? But if I scroll in, I'm not really sure that looks better or worse. I guess it can kind of go either way. But regardless of how you feel about what it does immediately, it definitely, by using the ACES color space, definitely gives you more details to use in your grading. There's definitely more there to work with. But if we look at that and then I change it back, you'll see what I mean by, kind of up to you to decide whether you think it looks better or worse. And I don't know, to me that looks a little more like a shot from space. All the little Christmas lights that showed up when I turned the ACES on, I guess could or could not seem like a good thing. So anyway, that is definitely just based on preference. Now, I tend to keep it on aces because, you know, like I said, I've heard that it's going to become the standard. So I want to start getting used to dealing with that. Every now and then, if I just really have a really busy image and I feel like, you know, let me see what this looks like in one of the other color sciences, I'll come check that out. All of this is grayed out because of the color science. If you put it on color managed, you can use the input color space, timeline color space. Leave all this alone right now. This is advanced level stuff for filmmaking. And you know, if you're just trying to learn the software to make videos at first, this is more than you need to deal with right now. There's a lot more you need to learn before you start getting into this kind of stuff. Or not that you need to learn. There's a lot more that I think you should focus on before you really get into any of this. I don't mess with any of this. Leave all this alone for right now. It's something we're going to deal with later in another video when we deal with LUTs. Broadcast safe. Broadcast safe settings can be enabled while you grade to limit both the luma and chroma of the video signal to one of 3 levels of acceptable overshoots and undershoots. Are you doing films for professional broadcasting? Probably. Leave all this the way it's set. Don't worry about it. You're probably never going to have to worry about this stuff. Generate soft clip LUTs. Care to venture a guess? Generate LUT from analyzed pattern. Oh, I've just got to go ahead and skip this because it's not going to mean anything to you. General options. So I'm probably going to start skipping a lot of this explaining. Is that a word? Is that a word? So I'm probably going to start skipping a lot of this explaining. You know, I've got 3,000 pages of user manual to get through. And these videos are already going kind of long. I think I'm going to start trying to speed this up. I'm starting to kind of understand why so many of the other ones are like super quick start guide to Davinci Resolve. And I'm trying to do more than that, but at the same time, it's, you know, almost impossible to just really explain what every single one of these are when the end result is, and that's why you should just leave it alone. So leave all this alone. Now, I do make some changes here under color. This luminance mixer defaults to 0. Let me show you what that does. If we go to our color page, and let me open my clips, make sure I'm on the right clip. I am. Here is the parade scope over here. We'll get to exactly how to read these and how to use them later, but for the most part, this tells you from left to right of your image, and the red, green, and blue here are each a representation of my image from left to right. Not from top to bottom though, but from left to right. This tells me how much red is in the shadows, midtones, and highlights of my image, regardless of where up and down those are. So there could be a big red blob up here, but if it was red in the shadow, it would actually show down here. Now it would show where it is from left to right. So you see there's a lot of red all through this thing, you know, except kind of, you see right here where there's not really a whole lot, and then there's a bunch right here. Well, that's why you see this kind of dip here, right here towards the right hand side. But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. But you see your luminance mix is right here. Let me show you what happens when you change something and your luminance mix is set to 100 like it is at the default. If I was to take the red over here on my lift, which is my shadows, and raise them up, look what's happening to the green and the blue. You see how the green and the blue are being affected by that change? Now, actually, I'm not going to say that. I don't know that. Now, many people like that to take place. Basically, Davinci Resolve is compensating for what you're doing by changing the green and blue values. Now, let me reset that. Let me take my luminance mix down to 0, like I set it in my settings just now. And now let me change that. Now the only thing that's being affected is what I'm changing. And personally, at a less than professional level, where I'm really every day learning more and more about the intricacies of color grading and how it all affects each other, when I change something, I would really prefer that to be the only thing that changes. And, you know, I'll deal with the rest later. I also see a lot of people that are professionals say that they only use it this way. So this is a tip that I really think you should do, especially at the beginning of your video editing career. So on the settings, click Luminance Mixer Defaults to 0, and that number will always be a 0, so that when you change things, only that individual thing will change, and it won't compensate by changing other things. Use an S-curve for contrast. Let me show you what that does. Down here on the contrast, if you look over at the scope down there on the bottom right, don't really look at the image. When you change your contrast up and down, you kind of see how it's affecting things. It basically takes the middle, which is the midtones, and spreads them, like divides them, squishes some of it up towards the highs and some towards the lows, therefore creating a contrast, because it takes the midtones, makes some of it a little brighter and some of it a little darker, so you get contrast. And now if you'll look at the image, you can see what's going on when I do that. It gets very flat and bland when I lower the contrast, and then when I raise it, it really starts making a super contrasting difference in the colors. But let me reset that. By the way, when we get to this, usually when you're affecting something, if you double click on the name of it, it will change back to the default. Double click on contrast, it goes back to what it was. So that's just a quick little tip there. Now if we turn the S-curve off for contrast and hit save, instead of just simply splitting up the midtones, basically it stretches, kind of think of it from midtone up and midtone down. It stretches all of it, so it allows even the brightest colors to get even brighter, even the darkest colors to get even darker. Instead of just taking the darker parts of the midtones and making it darker, it tends to change all of it. And I personally think the effect is it's a little better for me. And again, this is one of those settings where when I'm color grading something, and like this would be a very difficult thing to put a color graded look on, because it's already set. I mean, it's already a professionally, it's already a professionally done color grade. So it already looks good. Did I have anything else that I changed here? I don't think I did. I think that's the way it looked. So if I was to try to put another look on this, it would be a little difficult. Things would be like, can't really tell if that looks better or worse. So one of the things that I will mess around with is when I start doing the contrast, I say to myself, okay, well, I wonder what that would look like with an S-curve contrast, since I keep it on, I keep that unchecked. So I'll just go and put that on there. I'll check that box and then come see what it looks like then. So sometimes you really just need to go turn the setting on and off to see if it works for you. But personally, I think that Luminance Mixer defaults to 0 and use S-curve for contrast. Actually, I want to click this one. I don't know why that didn't save. Luminance Mixer defaults to 0, select that, and use S-curve for contrast. Unselect that, and go back to your preset. And I'm gonna save that as my preset again, so I can update that since I just made those changes. And now local version for new clips and timeline. Yes, save timeline thumbnails with project. I don't do that. I don't do that because it even says right here, this provides a good history of the project, but takes much longer to complete and uses more hard disk space. I mean, it's really just not that big of a deal for me. I don't think it should be for you either. Dynamics, profile, and versions. We're gonna go. That's a lot. Camera raw. We're going to deal with that in a video in about 2 chapters. Let's just skip all this for now. If you're using camera raw, it's pretty much set up straight out of the box at a good default level for you. I don't think you'll have to make any changes right off the bat, maybe once you really start using the software. Capture and playback, again, this is for having an external device, like a deck link and a capture card or a capture card. So we're just going to skip that because I'm not going to deal with anything in this video series that deals with external peripheries. Subtitles, max characters, the caption duration, and the maximum characters per second. Play around with those if you're having an issue with your captions not lasting long enough or anything like that. Pretty much leave them set the way they are out of the box. And finally, we have Fairlight. I would say to leave all of this the way that it is set by default. It's already got 48,000 sample rate, negative 23 on target loudness level. That's pretty much what I always use. I don't really see a reason to change any of this. If you have a good reason, again, please leave it in the comments. Maybe there's something I'm not aware of that'll help me out with my sound design. But so far, every time that I've looked up how to do anything with my sound, it never mentions changing any of these. So that's pretty much the only reason I haven't. And that's a wrap for our project settings. Appreciate you watching the video. I promise I'm going to keep working on the camera recording and the lighting in the studio, and especially the sound. That stuff takes money. I don't have any. I work an awful lot. I make a pretty good, decent amount of money, and I'm always broke. I kind of have expensive hobbies, though. But anyway, I'm always broke, but I'm always happy. I have an awesome wife and an awesome life. So, see you in the next video, and until then, live to learn and learn to live.